thank you for joining us this afternoon. So this is the session on Dynamics Lifecycle Services, how to drive repeatable, predictable implementations with LCS. So my name is Satish Thomas. I'm the Group Program Manager on our Business Solutions Platform team, which includes Microsoft Dynamics Lifecycle Services, Developer Experience, a lot of the core platform pieces. So very glad all of you were able to join us, and hopefully you'll take a lot from here and learn a lot about LCS. So just from a quick agenda perspective, we will cover what is Dynamics Lifecycle Services, the value for key personas, and being an engineer, it'll be very demo heavy, right? So a lot of the stuff that I show is not going to be slideware. It's actually going to be a product that's live and running that you can use once you get out of here as well. And then we'll cover some roadmap aspects as well in terms of Azure alignment, et cetera, that we're working on right now. So, and then towards the end, we will, my colleague Winston from our product marketing team will join us to actually walk through some real customer scenarios and customer successes that we're seeing out there from people using Dynamics Lifecycle Services. So with that, actually, how many people know what Dynamics and Dynamics AX is in this room? Okay, good. Because as we were standing in the booth and all those things, there was a lot of folks that came through and said, hey, what is Dynamics? And it was interesting to see everybody had their own assumptions, etc. The funniest one was one person who asked me saying, AX, when is that Xbox game coming out? So that was a little interesting. Okay, so for the few folks that don't know what Dynamics AX is, and this is very important because one of the key focus areas for us is how do we get more partners and more people into the ecosystem, and you'll see us be very deliberate about making it easy for new partners and new developers to onboard onto our platform. So without going into too much detail, obviously Dynamics AX is Microsoft's ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning solution, typically for upper mid-market, and has a wide range of modules that are available, including retail, manufacturing, distribution, service industries, and public sector. So I'm not going to go into the whole gory details, but essentially, we don't have millions and millions and millions of customers. We have hundreds and thousands of customers, but typically businesses that enable for which we enable business processes, etc. So with that said, at a high level, anybody who's been anywhere near an ERP instance knows that it's not just a cookie cutter solution that you can take out. It usually involves what we ship from a Dynamics AX perspective, plus partner solutions, plus customer solutions and VARs, and obviously end users always have their specific needs, so think customizations, etc. And that's what essentially makes up a business application solution. So with that context, I wanted to get into what does Dynamics Lifecycle Services mean and how it relates to this space. So one of the things, actually quick, how many people have been involved with implementations, ERP implementations in general? Excellent. So I'm guessing everybody has happy stories about how all of those go, etc., right? So, it's partly funny, partly actually almost always not funny. But one of the key things that we're focusing on right now as we think through Dynamics AX today, which is 2012 R3 in market, and our future version is focusing on the consumption experience. It's one thing to ship a product. It's another thing to enable the product to be consumed more easily, etc. Right? So if you look at Dynamics Lifecycle Services, when we started it about 1.5 years ago, that was the focus. How do we make our product be able to get consumed as easily, as predictable, as repeatable, and as high quality as possible, right? So you'll see us kind of zone in a lot into that theme, right? And think of it as the consumption experience and our focus to make that better. So, implementation priorities and challenges for the folks that put up your hand, having done an implementation, this should not be any surprise. agility, typically the scenarios and everything that you lock down at the very beginning always changes. So there's no point in kind of going in with a la-la mode thinking, hey, what we decide in the first meeting when it's a little bit more salesy is what is eventually going to get implemented, right? There's always going to be some delta, and we just need to kind of deal with it. On time and budget, obviously, both of them are challenges, right? We do a lot of analysis on Dynamics AX implementations. You know, we're happy that it is slightly better than what the competitors are, but obviously not where it needs to be, right? When you kind of compare, it's from an industry perspective, the numbers are actually pretty stark in terms of how many end up on time and how many end up on budget. And I think this is where we've really, really taken it to heart, and hopefully some of the solutions that you see here show you the progress we're making and more importantly, where we want to go with this. The third thing is quality, right? So it's one thing to complete it, and you know, right now, being on the R&D team and also having spent some time on the customer experience team, which is essentially a solution architecture organization dealing with the biggest 15 implementations of Dynamics in the world, this one really rings close to what I was doing before. You know, when we implement Dynamics AX and let's say it goes down in production, never a good thing, right? And then when there's performance issues, when a certain operation is taking 35 seconds to enter a sales order, never a good thing, right? So when we keep digging into some of these aspects, one of the things we found out was it's always common patterns that we see when we get escalations. Typically, it's a bad customization. You know, that simple customization on the sales order table, it always looks simple. You know, will cause an operation to degrade to row by row, right? That's a huge impact to the production instance. Well, you know, so it's sometimes a happy thing when we say, oh, that's the issue, let's fix it, and the customer is in a better state. But it makes us sad that the customer had to get into that state in the first place. So you'll see some tooling and services that we've built so that you can prevent these kind of scenarios. And what is our solution for all this? So think of Dynamics Lifecycle Services. Obviously, it has morphed a lot over the last year and a half. It's essentially an integrated application lifecycle management solution for Dynamics, right? So we've obviously started with Dynamics AX, and you'll hear a little bit about in the roadmap how we're going to roll this into CRM, et cetera as well. So it's essentially automation of best practices. So think about, you know, things that can be automated. We are obsessed about automating. So think about things like deployment. Think about things like code analysis, diagnostics, a lot of these things that can be automated. So we will automate. And I'll show you some specific examples and customer stories that kind of go behind it. And then we have a methodology-driven experience that we enable through Lifecycle Services. And this is very important. So if you look at something like a pre-go-live check, right? A lot of customers, when you know, for the 15 biggest customers that we have, we've seen a lot of different pre-go-live checklists. And none of them have all of it. Well, some of them are actually pretty good, but a lot of secret sauce that goes into it. So one of the things that we've done is everything that we've learned from customers, everything that we've learned looking at what we see in the ecosystem, we make it as best practice methodologies. So that way you have a very, very good base to build on top of. So you're always open to put your own secret sauce, but we want to make sure that the min bar is consistent across the ecosystem. And what does this all accrue to? Predictable outcomes. So one of the things I wanted to kind of cover was, you know, the momentum. So like I said, this started off 1.5 years ago out of need. Right, out of need in terms of what we were seeing in the ecosystem, what we were seeing as gaps in the ecosystem, and also as it has turned out to be a competitive differentiator as well. So one of the things that you'll start seeing is in the latest Gartner reports and stuff where they've actually called out Dynamics Lifecycle Services as a key strength and a differentiator for the Dynamics suite of products versus the competition. So it's something that we're very proud of because it started from very small, and now it's actually reached a point where it's decent scale and growing very fast. So we've got about 20,000 registered users. So if you think about it in terms of number of partners out there and number of customers, that's actually a big number, right? And as we go into the next version of AX, Dynamics LCS is going to be much core to the experience. So we're going to see a huge uptake and adoption when it comes to this. 13,000 projects out of about 8,000 or so are active Dynamics AX implementations. So one of the things that you'll see as part of the demos is you don't need to only be able to use LCS when you're starting an implementation. Even if you're already live, there's pieces of LCS that you can leverage today, right? And as I show the demo, that'll become more clear. Because I think that one of the things that we're pretty hardcore about is taking away excuses for why people don't use LCS. And this was a common theme saying, hey, this all looks good, but I'll use it when I start my next new implementation, right? So if you have a already running R3 instance or AX 2012 instance, there's a set of operate phase services that you can leverage today, and I'll show you a quick demo on what's possible. So, let's kind of get into this. So if you look at the application lifecycle management phases, there's 3 key pieces. One is around the define, develop, and operate. And usually there's 3 different personas that are more closely aligned to these phases than not. So when we talk about define, it's all the way from pre-sales to where a functional consultant is sitting with the customer, SMEs, kind of figuring out what are the business processes they would like to get implemented, things like license sizing. Anybody who's done AX license sizing kind of sees the value of a service like that. And then usage profiler. So things like sitting next to a customer and saying, what are the typical usage profile? How many peak concurrent users do you have? Do you have seasonal usage, etc.? And why do we ask all of that information? Because we have another service called infrastructure sizing. So going back to the point about why do we see implementations take longer than they should or go lower quality than it should, it's because in a lot of cases infrastructure sizing is not done right. So typically a consultant goes in and says, this is what you need, but through LCS there's a more structured way of saying, okay, tell us about your usage, and Microsoft, using everything that we have learned and what we've built the product for, recommends a set of infrastructure which you can use as a starting point for your implementation. Again, automating as much as possible so that you guys can worry about the value add scenarios versus just the rudimentary kind of the manual tasks. And then you've got the develop phase of it as well. So this is typically your developer. And this is where it's a very important service for us because, like I said, AX is heavily customized, even though that's something that we're happy with and not happy with, because in a lot of cases, the lower the customizations, the easier it is to upgrade, etc. So we'd love you to customize only when it's really, really needed. But having gone through custom implementations, I know what reality is. So let's say you do customize, the possibility for errors and the possibility for deviating from best practices is high, right? And we don't want the quality of code to vary too much between developers or implementations, because that's not good at the end of the day for the customer, right? I like to say that anybody can write code. Coding inherently is not a hard thing, but only a few people can write good code. Now, if we said that only people who can write really, really good code will have happy customers, it just doesn't scale, right? So one of the things we want to do is make it easier for developers to stay closer to the best practices and automate as much of that. So you'll see the code analysis tool that we've built that takes care of this scenario. How many people have actually seen the X++ best practice document out there? Okay, 2 people. So this is about, I believe it's about 85 pages of best practices that you need to adhere to, right? And being an engineer, I usually can't read beyond page 1. So one of the things that we did was everything that's there as best practices, we've automated. So within a few minutes, you can run these rules and immediately see what the state of your code is versus, reading through and, having various evaluation of those best practices. And then the third piece is the operate phase. So this is a pretty strong set of services for us, and the piece where we see the highest usage for. Things that fall in the operate phase involve, assume you're already live. How do you diagnose issues around that AX implementation? So little things like, running out of space, not having number sequences set up. All of these things that Microsoft knows about, learns new every week as we look at implementations, we ship as new rules for the diagnostic service, right? And then you can leverage that immediately because LCS has a monthly ship cadence. So every month you get new rules that you can execute against your environments to make sure that you're running as close to the good state that we recommend as you can. And then there's another piece around cloud-powered support, which is allowing you to, for some reason, if there's some bug in Microsoft's code, doesn't happen, how do you log a support case, right? How do you log a support case in the most efficient fashion? And I'll kind of walk through in terms of demo. So now let's get into the demo phase. So I've kind of walked through, again, just to kind of frame all of this. Dynamics Lifecycle Services is the integrated ALM solution. And for each of these phases, there's kind of specific services that map to each one of them. So we're going to start with the define phase. So the define phase is typically, how do you do your business process modeling? And one of the things that we've seen is a specific customer. I don't think they've allowed us yet to use their name, but essentially they saved about 200 hours or so by modeling the business process within LCS. And once those processes were modeled, it kind of continued into the development phase where the developers could implement the customizations needed and kind of lives through the end-to-end life cycle of the project. So think about it, 200 hours in the context of an implementation. This wasn't a huge implementation, but you can kind of see the possible benefits that you can also take away from it. So again, one of the things, like I said, that we're really obsessed about is taking away those, automating as much as possible so that you're spending your time where it really matters. So the first demo, set of demos that I'm going to show you is around the define. So I'll show you the project dashboard, business process modeler, license sizing, usage profiler, and infrastructure sizing. So let's step right into it, if this thing works. And Winston, I need your password. Can you shout it out? That works sometimes, by the way. Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay, cool. So like I said, one of the things that I'd like all of you to walk away from is this is not something on slides that is coming out in 6 months, etc. This is something that's available today. So if you go to lcs.dynamics.com, it's a very, one of the things that we're very hardcore about is it's a very SASE ALM solution, meaning you can come here, learn about the solution, going back to very little attention spans for people these days. We actually have kind of 5-minute videos for each of those services that give you a quick walkthrough and how you can get value out of it immediately. We also have some quick references, and if you're into the long training, we also have a 45-minute training video that we've built out here as well. So you'll notice that we leverage video training a lot just because that's what we like, and hopefully, and that's where we're seeing a lot of usage as well. So you can come here. All you need to do is hit sign in, and if you're already a Dynamics AX customer, all you need to do is leverage your MBS voice credentials. You already have this. So LCS is not a separate SKU or something that you need to pay extra for. This is already part of what you have access to. You just need to leverage it. So assume you log in. And once you log into Lifecycle Services, So once you log into Lifecycle Services, you'll see that we leverage the concept of project workspaces. So every implementation gets a project workspace. So a project workspace is typically owned by the customer because not unfortunately, just the nature of implementations, you have multiple key stakeholders. Consultants come in and out. Sometimes partners come in and out, right? So we want to make sure that the customer owns the project and they control access into for who gets to see what is in there and who gets to play in it as well. So once you get into a project, you have a rich methodology experience where you can walk through specific steps. So let's say we had a methodology here to deploy and implement Dynamics AX 2012 R3 on Azure, right? So what you would start off with is a set of methodology steps that Microsoft ships. But again, this is where you're able to edit this methodology and change it and save it as well. So if you're a partner or if you're a customer and you have a secret sauce for whatever methodology, you can modify what we have and have everybody in your organization use it, right? So one of the usage scenarios that really surprised us was each of our top 10 partners, what we've noticed is they've taken the base Microsoft methodology, added their secret sauce, and shared it among their organization. So it is still possible for you to provide your secret sauce. It just, we just bring it into this LCS experience so you don't need to do that elsewhere. So typically what happens here is, I need to create a project plan, I need to create a solutions preview, all that good stuff. And as you can see here, this project workspace connects to the rest of the Microsoft services very well as well. So when you configure your project, you can tell it where your document repository is, typically SharePoint. You can connect it to Visual Studio Online, etc. So for this demo, let's actually step into the business process modeling service. So typically, business process modeling happens with the functional consultant sitting in a room somewhere, drawing stuff up, etc. And what happens is once you go past that phase, those documents go out of date, those models go out of date, and as you go through the rest of the implementation phases, there's not as much traceability. So one of the things that we've enabled here is we're based off the APQC business model. So APQC is an industry standard. That's what we've used as a base. But again, very customizable. You can use that as a starting point, and you can make it your own. So you can customize anything here, drag and drop, etc. So let's pick one business process here, just so you can kind of see an example of what the experience looks like. So just to kind of give you a little bit of context, the way you record a business process is there's something called Task Recorder. So Task Recorder is something that you download, you install on your AX client, and you basically walk through your business process. So typically it's a functional consultant with somebody at the customer side, et cetera, et cetera. Once you've done that, you're able to upload that into BPM. So, and once you upload it, leveraging the rich metadata in AX, we translate that into a workflow and capture a lot of metadata around this. So for example, this is the business process within the real AX client that I recorded. I uploaded it, and BPM translated into this business process. So as you can see, this is not just a fancy Visio. It is actually there's a lot of metadata behind it, and you can see exactly which table, which AOT object was affected, was accessed as part of this business process. So, it might seem like a very small thing, but this metadata is used throughout the implementation process. So think of an example once you go live, and you have to take a hotfix. When you take the hotfix, we will use the metadata in that hotfix, cross-check it with the metadata in BPM, and say, these are the business processes that are impacted by this hotfix you're about to apply. Right? So that full scenario becomes really powerful when you use all these services together in an integrated fashion. And that's actually one of the biggest uses that we've seen by partners and customers, because they basically prioritize their test cycles when they update a CU or hotfixes based on which business process is impacted. Okay? So, and again, obviously, this is Microsoft, this is business processes within the client, but if you decide to customize, you can edit this business process, put your custom business processes here, and have this as your business process repository. So we have, out of about our top 10 partners, there's about 6 of the partners that heavily leverage BPM libraries for implementations that they do today. And as you move into the next version of AX, this is basically just core part of the product. So something that is very useful for folks to kind of get used to right now. So, that's a very quick rapid fire of what BPM is. Secondly, we'll get into what I talked about earlier. Again, we're still within the define phase around license sizing. So license sizing, for the folks who have done license sizing before, we all know that it's not the easiest thing in the world. And part of it is because, there's inherent complexities in how business applications are licensed, etc. But one of the things that we try to do to make it easier is, again, have a methodology-driven experience where we ask you a lot of structured questions around, the modules that you're about to use and the profile for each of those roles for those modules. So, for example, in the warehousing module, we basically ask you, okay, which role will be using the software, how many users will it have, how will they be accessing it, etc. Right? Now, we ask you all of these questions, and at the end of it, basically, what we do churn out is a very, a summary of what we think the CALs you'll require. Right? So typically all of this has happened over multiple phone calls, multiple Excel sheets, etc. But this becomes a very good starting point as you start that licensing conversation and basically license to fit, not license for shelfware. And I think this is something that we've found really useful where customers do it first up and they only buy what they really need versus kind of erring too much and not using it as well. And again, remember, all this metadata is in LCS in your project, so you can leverage it for the other services as well, where it makes sense. So staying with the define phase, another piece is one of the biggest reasons why we see escalations again is because, people run into, let me get a machine, let me size, let me get a Gorilla VM. Gorilla VM is a code name for a very big VM. And usually it's not right. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, what we do is it's not sized correctly. So one of the things that we have here is, as part of the define phase, we walk you through something called the usage profiler. So this is where you tell us about your environment details, you tell us about your business processes, and usage characteristics of those business processes. We ask you about operating sites. So all these operating sites, the metadata from it, we will leverage to see, for example, what is your peak workloads? Are you always at, let's say if you have 500 total users, maybe not all of them are concurrent users because you're across 3 global sites. So all these questions enable us to kind of give you some of that intelligence. So we ask you all these kind of gory questions, and eventually out comes a report that tells you, okay, these are the peak concurrent users that we've detected based on what you've told us. These are the remote peak users. This is the estimated peak load for a week. So, as you think through from a customer perspective, going back to the point I said about being over budget, typically if we err too much on too much hardware when a customer doesn't need it, those are some of the reasons why it goes over budget. Right? So we want to make sure that you have full visibility into what the actual story is so that you can size appropriately. So if you notice this, what this shows is, for some reason, on a Friday evening, the workload, the number of concurrent users in the system peaks. So the question is, do you size for the peak on that Friday night, or do you size for the average number of concurrent users over the week. Obviously, that's a slightly more complicated question, but these kind of insights allow you to do that. So I'm guessing it's a nightclub because the peak traffic is over the weekend, but you kind of get the point. And all this metadata is leveraged for other insights that we will deliver as you use other services. So all of this is wonderful things. And another piece is we ask you all these questions that you need to worry about, right? So I'll give you another example here in terms of batch workloads. So if I can find it. And then, from a reports perspective, so across different aspects of the product, like reports, we'll ask you which reports are most commonly accessed, what's the typical complexity, all those things. And why do we ask you all of this? It's because leveraging all of this data that you've provided us, all the infrastructure sizing knowledge that we have, we actually recommend, we will recommend what infrastructure sizing we think is required for the implementation that you just described to us. So here you go. So in this case, when I create a new estimate, typically it's going to ask me, tell us which usage profile output would you like to use. And once you do that, out comes a recommendation, which is, for example, folks that are very familiar with implementations, you'll know we're recommending 5 AOS clients, 2 enterprise portal, 1 AOS just for batch, et cetera, et cetera. So by no means is this something that you can run away with and just implement. It is a starting point and a very good starting point as you look at infrastructure sizing for your implementation. So this, again, so whatever I'm showing you here is not just an experience for on-prem AX. It's exactly the same experience for R3 on Azure. So when you get to deploy, and when you go through the define phase for deploying R3 on Azure, you go through all of these same services. And when you do the infrastructure sizing, if you tell us that, hey, I'm going to deploy this into Azure, the infrastructure that we recommend is going to be custom for Azure. We will tell you specifically which VM sizes we recommend. And I think that's a very critical piece of this experience. So hopefully you're kind of getting the whole story around, how do we try to take away the guessing game? How do we try to make it more predictable? And since we ship monthly, as we learn new things, we kind of make sure that all of these algorithms are updated and you can leverage it right away. So from a defined perspective, we'll kind of stop it at this. So I've kind of given a rapid-fire demo of everything that's there. But like I said, everything that I showed is something that you can try out today if you're a Dynamics customer or a partner. So with that, let's actually switch back into this piece. So again, what I showed you was the project dashboard, the business process modeler, the license sizing estimator, the usage profiler, and finally the infrastructure sizing as well. The next piece obviously is for the developer persona. So this is something that, there's huge ROI, because if you write bad code, you're going to pay for it over and over and over again, either through escalations or unhappy end users, etc. So it's one thing to say, hey, this is not a product issue, it's a customization issue. At the end of the day, it's a bad customer experience. So this is something that we really spent a lot of time on. And what we've built essentially is something called a code analysis tool. So the code analysis tool will take your custom code, you basically upload it to LCS, it'll process the code against known best practices. So remember the 85-page document plus more. And then we basically recommend what you need to fix. So let's actually get let's get into a demo of that one quickly. So I'm going to switch through between demo, etc., because I think showing the real product is hopefully much more useful than kind of showing slides. So, okay, there you go. Customization analysis. So in this service, what you basically, I'll quickly show you the experience. You basically go to the code analysis tool, you press click, you provide the model, you tell us what version it is, and then you basically upload it, and that's it. right? So if you notice here, ERP and ALM is typically not the sexiest things that people talk about, or the simplest things to use. And if you look at it from this perspective, customization analysis for all your custom code, it doesn't get easier than this. So once you upload it, after about 30, 40, 45 minutes, depending on how big your code file is, out comes a customization analysis report. So this will show you a quick summary of what you've customized. It'll give you a summary of the issues, so very, very gory details on what you need to fix. And it'll show you things like, what are the typical errors that we're seeing in your code, etc. So So think about, things like delete actions missing in secure object, which is in one of the tables, right? So very, very detailed information, but very important for you to fix so that you don't get a surprise post-go live, right? And it'll summarize all of this in terms of errors, warnings, and informationals. And the goal is, before you go live or as you're building your customizations, you fix these along the way. And then another thing that's actually pretty useful is there's also an output, a compiler output that is available here, where all the issues that I showed you, you can basically save as, import it into the Dynamics AX client, and the developers will see a to-do list. So everything that is listed as an error will become a to-do in the compiler, and all you need to do is give it to them, and they can knock it out one by one, right? So very powerful, and we're actually seeing, whenever an error is found and fixed here, guaranteed it's a pager that we prevented going off once they go live, right? And another critical piece about this is, again, like, since LCS ships monthly, it's not just features that we ship every month. We also ship rules. So anything that we learn new for code analysis in terms of a rule, we ship it in that monthly cycle as well. So in the last 3 months, I believe we shipped about 25 to 30 rules. So that is intelligence that we learned from the field that you can leverage just by running this in your environments. So that's the code analysis tool. And then we'll kind of switch back into the rest of the phases. So one of the other things I'll show you is, as part of the development phase, especially since we're on the topic of Azure and all those things, is dev test environments. So typically today, obviously we have R3 in Azure, and now that premium storage is available from our friends in Azure, we're seeing a lot of production instances being spun off and implementations beginning. But one of the biggest uses that we see for Dynamics R3 in Azure is dev and test environments. So while you're in the development phase, I'll actually kind of quickly show you how simple it is to deploy R3 on Azure. So assume you've gone through all these experiences around defining, developing, etc. We have something called cloud-hosted environments. So cloud-hosted environments essentially is, it allows you to deploy Dynamics AX, which is as ERP as it gets, into Azure within a few clicks, leveraging the business processes and the custom code that you've already built and LCS is aware of. So I'll show you an example here. So what we're about to deploy here is Dynamics R3 AX 2012 R3 in Azure. And one of the first things it asks us is, what topology would you like to deploy, right? So demo is actually another very commonly used scenario. And one of our biggest partners in the last 3 weeks has actually gone exclusive on R3 and Azure demo instances for all their pre-sales, which is pretty interesting because typically, to prep up a pre-sales environment, it takes a couple of days, blah, blah, blah. You have to always ping your IT guy to make sure it's up, etc. In this case, they've taken all of that infrastructure and manual work and have us worry about it, right? So that's actually a very powerful use scenario that we're seeing for the demo topologies for R3 and Azure. And for the sake of this demo, I'll actually pick on the dev test topology. So the dev test topology, once you select that, it'll ask you, okay, do you want a development topology, development with shared SQL, are you a retail developer, etc. And assume you choose one of those. The next thing we will ask you is, so before we deploy, we basically have a very rich customization and configuration screen for this. So these are typical things that your IT admin or your network admin needs to spend a lot of time on. So you can join a federated domain. So if you want to kind of have this environment sitting at the edge of your network, you can provide those details and it'll get joined into it. You can provide the service account information. You can provide the custom naming or anything that you'd like to do around this. And this is all very easy UI that you can specify here. And all of this configuration information is taken into account when you hit next here. So when you hit next here, essentially it takes all the configuration that you did in that previous screen that I saw. It takes the custom code that you have in the project if you specified it. Otherwise, you can do it post-deployment. And then it deploys Dynamics AX. So typically, a demo instance takes about 45 minutes. A dev test topology takes about 2 to 3 to 4 hours. And a production topology, which you can do with a very similar experience, probably takes about 8 to 10 hours, depending on how many environments it takes. So one of the latest production deployments that we saw was about, I believe, 32 environments, pretty big customer. And that kind of ran overnight and got completed the next day. So think about it, in terms of what I said earlier, in terms of zapping out all these manual tasks and things that we can automate, we will automate. And this has been a very, very well-used scenario. And basically, people have more time to spend on making the customers happy or doing custom development versus just things like this that are just manual tasks. So I'm not going to deploy this because it's going to go into my Azure subscription, but you kind of get the point. So in this case, actually, before the presentation, we just deployed an Azure environment. Let's see if we can find it. So if you look at this, after that 45 minutes or a couple of hours once you've deployed it, you'll come to this page where it'll show you the VM details. So this, when you click on it, you'll see an RDP file. It'll set you up with a password for the initial use, and then, of course, you can change it. And as you know, if a VM is not being used, you can pause it and not pay for it. So all of those capabilities are available for you from LCS itself. So in this case, I can just click on that VM, and this is essentially a real Dynamics AX dev test environment that got spawned for me, right? So if you look at it, there was a demo in Satya's and Brad's keynote earlier. When was it? Yesterday. It's meetings all day. Yesterday, which kind of showed a little bit of these scenarios, right? How you can deploy business applications within a couple of hours, get it running with the remote app, and just having your users double-click on their desktop and log into this, right? So pretty powerful scenario, and something that, as part of my job, I meet a lot with analysts. And in the last couple of months, the story around the integrated ALM story that we have for Dynamics is really hitting home. If you look at, a lot of you probably deal with other competitors as well, but if you look at SAP's ALM story, if you look at Oracle's ALM story, and some of the more nimble players, we've actually smoked them out in some of these scenarios, and there's a lot of catch-up that they'll need to do. When we started off, we were playing catch-up, but not anymore, and I think it's great to see the analysts kind of call that out as well. So definitely something that all of you can leverage and is available for you today. Yes.
So that's all preloaded, ready to go.
Yes. So if you choose a developer VM, everything that's needed for a developer is in there. So if you go for a demo instance, we might not put the developer tools in there, but we basically tell you what comes in there. Okay, so with that, I'll switch back into the PowerPoint. Yep. So the question was, when you deploy a developer VM through this experience, what's on there, etc. So to Winston's point, there's a TechNet article with a lot of gory details on what is a topology map to. So for example, retail components only come when you select a retail topology, because a manufacturing customer wouldn't care about that as well. So the TechNet article would be a very good resource to see what's in there. Okay, so the final phase that I'll kind of get into is the operate phase, and this is where, assume you did not go through the end-to-end, you did not do BPM, you did not do license sizing, you just have a couple of customers that are running R3 today, right? So this is where the operate services come through, where there's a few key scenarios for the IT administrator. One is proactive monitoring of the environment. And when we mean monitoring in the R3 world, it's essentially diagnostic. So how can you discover that environment within LCS and execute all those diagnostics rules that I told you about to make sure that your environment is sitting in a decent state, right? So what I'll show you is how you can discover those undiscovered environments sitting on-prem or sitting somewhere into LCS, and how you can hook it up to diagnostics, cloud-powered support, etc. Right? So none of it's not like you get everything or nothing. You can actually pick and choose for R3. As we go into the next version, it's going to be more of a end-to-end experience. But today, for the operate phase services, you can actually start using it right away. So what I'll show you in the demo is essentially how you can discover an environment, a pre-existing environment, into LCS. So I'm back in Lifecycle Services. Again, the very familiar project workspace scenario. So here you have system diagnostics. So one of the things is, since, diagnostics will work if it's an R3 and Azure instance, if it's an on-prem instance, etc. And the way we do that is, when you need to get your environment discovered, we have something called we have a setup task, which essentially you'll need to download, and you can configure how often those collectors are collected and published into LCS. And you have full control into what goes into LCS. You can actually look at what goes in. It's essentially a flat file, and you can see what information is collected. It's usually nothing really interesting. It's just system configurations and things like that that'll help us recommend what you need to fix, etc. So in this case, if you go to admin, it'll basically, if you go down there, you can download the installer. You run the installer on whatever AOS that you'd like to get discovered within LCS. There's an exchange of certificates. And once you have that hooked up, you can come to the dashboard and see what information is being collected. So I'll give you an example of things. So allow database snapshot, allow snapshot isolation. This is a best practice that we recommend. Looks like it is not being adhered to, so we have it set as a warning. Number sequence cache candidate. So all these things are executed right away, and similar to CAT, all these rules are continuously updated. So one of the things that we do, which is actually a very good sign, is whenever we get calls from customers or partners saying, "Hey, this customer is having a situation, can you help?" The first thing we ask them today is run diagnostics and send us the output. And it's a beautiful thing, because typically they don't come back to us. So that could mean two things. You have the very dire scenario, which I won't go into, or you have the scenario where they found the issue and they fixed it. Right? So this is something that we're very hardcore about now, where even when you enter a support case, in a future state, we're going to say, give us your diagnostics output. And that's usually all it takes. Because once you run diagnostics, you're not going to see exclamations in there and still say, hey, I have an issue, without resolving them, right? So this is something that, one of the biggest things is it's the change management piece, to be honest, is the harder part about all this. LCS didn't exist when 2012 was released. We have customer stories that we'll go through in terms of where people are seeing successes, but the biggest thing is the change management. How do you go back and make your org use this, not just kind of see it and say, yes, looks good, but we'll use it for the next project, not this one, right? And I think that's the thing that if there's one thing that everybody can take away is it's very easy to use, right? And as much as possible, if you use it, you'll see kind of benefits out of it. So I'll give you examples of what is collected in diagnostics, just so you can see. These are all the rule violations, and we have a rich workflow around. If it's a rule that you're aware of, and for some reason you don't want to fix it, you can ignore it, and we won't bug you again. And then we have the concept of collectors. So collectors are things that you need to collect from the environment that you can write rules for. So for example, surprisingly, it's not all about infrastructure. So diagnostics, and this is where, as I was talking to one of the analysts, we've been talking about it, but it only really hit home when he told it back to me, is typically diagnostics tools have all been about infrastructure, etc. So one of the things that LCS Diagnostics does different is we collect a lot of application configuration information as well. And we have the ability to write rules based on that application rule, setup as well. So for example, if you have your accounts receivable set up incorrectly, we're able to write a rule that'll tell you to go fix it. So it's not all about, hey, your SQL Server is running out of space. That is one piece of it. But as a business application, it's more than just infrastructure. And in a lot of cases, it's application configuration that might be causing the issues. So that's where LCS Diagnostics is very powerful because of all the collectors and the capabilities that we have with that. So the other piece that I'll kind of walk through is, diagnostics is one thing by itself, and it's pretty useful. But one of the biggest bangs for the buck that we're seeing from customers and partners, and even from us, is how this comes together for the support experience. So how many people have entered a support case with the Dynamics team or Microsoft at some point? Yeah. So, sometimes it's a pretty hard experience, sometimes it's not. And one of the things that we look at very closely is the total days to solution. So the total days to solution is when you, for some reason, you call Microsoft saying, I think I have an issue, and by the time we turn around with a fix, right? Now, you could take guesses on what the average days to solution is, but we're pretty clear that it's too long, right? So one of the things that we looked at is, why are the days to solution so big? We found out that the average number of emails exchanged between a customer and a support engineer is 50 plus emails for a case. And what are the typical questions? Hey, what SQL Server version are you on? What hotfix level are you on? How did you configure accounts receivable, etc.? Right? So all those questions can be zapped out, and hopefully the story is coming together in your head as well. We know a lot of these things from diagnostics. We know what business processes they've configured. So there's a lot more context that we have even before you contact us. So one of the things that we've built is something called cloud-powered support, where you can actually go create an incident from LCS. And the first thing, actually, here's another nugget that we learned when we really, really looked at all of these support cases. A lot of cases that customers call about have already been fixed. It's just that they didn't know about it. And if anybody wants to take a guess of how many cases, what percentage of cases that a customer calls for has already been fixed by the time they call? I'm slightly less optimistic. So her number is 80%. Unfortunately, it's not that high. It's about 37%. Still very high. So out of about 10 customers that call, 4 customers don't even need to call us, right? So how do you deflect that? So in this LCS cloud-powered support world, the first thing we ask you is, tell us about your issue. So now if you notice here, the first thing we'll ask you is, again, what is the issue? It's actually searching for all of the issues in the back end. And this is interesting because this is not what, the little cursory thing that Salesforce does in terms of issue search. This actually looks at all the published hotfixes. This looks at Microsoft's product database as well, where if we know of an issue and we're working on it, we don't want you to enter an issue. Just follow the other issue and we'll notify when you fix it, right? So this is the beauty of having new hires and a lot of people moving within Microsoft, because these are little things that experiences that we're very used to in the non-enterprise world, like following a person. So in this case, you can follow an issue and you'll get notified when it gets fixed. So it looks at issues that are open, it looks at issues that are resolved, and even workarounds. So there's probably a customer that called before you for which we gave a workaround. And in that case, we don't want you to ask us again, and we don't want to give you another workaround which might look slightly different from the previous workaround. So we just want to make sure that you get it right from the source. And another quick thing I'll actually go over is, I like picking on Salesforce here because they have an issue search, which is just basically a text search. In this case, it actually tells you about the issue. And if you're in the AX world, you'll appreciate how much you'd love to see the objects that are modified. You can either download it, or in this case, you can actually view the line of code that was modified for that fix. And remember, you haven't even applied a fix yet. You're still searching. So it's powerful deflection, and we're actually seeing about anybody, for all the customers that go through cloud-powered support, we're seeing about 30 to 40% of issues deflected even before they enter it. How do we know it? Because we have telemetry on this information where we see that, okay, they started off with create incident. They were going for it. And then they searched for it, and then they didn't go for it. So, it's pretty reliable information as far as that goes. So for some reason, let's say I couldn't find the issue, and I want to create an incident. Here's the piece. The first thing we ask us is, hey, can you share the diagnostics information? And all you need to do is, if you already have LCS diagnostics running, you can just point us to the environment, and you hit continue here. And at this point, all that application configuration information, infrastructure information, all comes with it. And hopefully we don't need those 50 emails to get to your SQL Server version, right? So pretty powerful scenario. And the other piece that we've done, in addition to that, is when you hit continue here, we will provision an Azure VM that looks exactly like your environment, except for data. So at that point, it becomes a repro shared environment between customer, Microsoft support, and whoever else needs to be in there. Because you guys are all used to the no repro problem, right? So in that case, we'll basically, we configure it exactly based on the diagnostics information. Any customizations you want us to pull in, we will create an Azure VM there. And at that point, when a Microsoft support engineer gets the case, he or she will have the diagnostics information, he or she will have the repro VM, and at that point, all they need to do is, this is an issue, let's get a fix out immediately. Or, I can repro it, let's try to repro it together on this environment. Right? So, one of the things that we've seen with this service is the days to solution has gotten shaved by 50%. Now, it's one thing to say it gets shaved by 50%, because if you don't use it, when you log a support case next and you don't go through this experience, you won't see it, right? I think that's where the key thing is usage, right? So hopefully, if you haven't been using this, hopefully this will encourage you to use it and give us feedback, right? Because one of the things that we do with the monthly updates is we're able to listen to the feedback, and if it makes sense, we'll have that discussion and then quickly rev it up in the next month's update. So you don't have to wait 6 months or 1 year to see your feedback make it through. It's usually much more quick than that. Okay, so with that, I think I was kind of done with the demo pieces, and we'll kind of quickly close. So again, Dynamics Lifecycle Services, integrated application lifecycle management for Dynamics. We started off with AX, and with the success we've seen with AX, obviously the market is demanding that we move on beyond just AX into CRM, et cetera. So you'll see a lot of announcements in the coming months in terms of how do we enable some of the things I showed in the CRM ecosystem as well. But before we end, I want to quickly get Winston to talk about some of the customer success stories that we're seeing, and then we can show you a little bit of roadmap and kind of take it from there. Winston?
All right. Thanks, Satish. So I think one of the things that's been really exciting, and a lot of things that people have asked about, is, okay, give us real use scenarios of what people are actually doing with it. It's got a nice set of tools. You guys got some nice interfaces. The developers have been doing a great job of literally coming out with these monthly revs. And I think one thing that really bears saying, if you looked at this maybe 6 months ago, it's looking radically different than it did 6 months ago. The methodology, integration, everything else. Keep going back. If there's something you're looking for, let us know what you want. But keep going back. As Satish said, they're doing an excellent job of listening to what customers want. Hey, what about this? Can you add that? What about this feature? And they're putting it in there. And it's really it's driving a lot of momentum. That's why we've got over 20,000 users in there. The three that we've got up here, I think, are great examples. And I've got one other one I'm going to add that's just about to go live with some of this other stuff that we're doing. But Kodak Alaris has been a really great one for us. They actually have been working with us for a long time with Lifecycle Services. The thing that's been great about them is the size of their implementation. They measure their production environment in dozens of VMs. Their annual run rate on Azure is going to be $800,000 to $1 million a year. Let that sink in for a second, because like the VMs that we're looking at are running for anywhere from like $500 to $2,000 a month each. So that gives you an idea how large their environment is. They have been using Lifecycle Services throughout their entire process. They've used it in terms of defining their environment, looking at their business processes. It's a great way that they've really leveraged the entire power of that application lifecycle management that we have for AX through Lifecycle Services. Microsoft, we ourselves are actually using it for what we need to do, for what we're being able to do in terms of sizing what we're doing, helping us get environments spun up for development and test. The way that we got the Enable the Mobile Workforce, for those of you who know, we have time and expense apps. We actually used LCS to help spin up the environments to do that development work and do the testing that we needed to do for it. And for JJ Foods, they've been using it to do their deployments, get their environments ready for R3 on Azure, and again, for development and test. And I think development and test, it's so easy to set up. It's so easy to provision. As Satish says, it's like 2 hours. Imagine going to the IT group and saying, yeah, I need an entire development environment configured in 2 hours. Can you do that for me? Yeah, go get the equipment, order it, buy it, stack it, rack it, stack it, provision it, and get it ready for me. Well, we can do that in Lifecycle Services. It's amazing. And the other one that we've got is Pet Supplies Plus. It's not a slide up here, but it's one that's going to be going live at the end of this month on Azure. For those of you who don't know, a U.S. retailer for pet supplies, 300 retail locations. They are going to be running, it's got over 2,500 licensed devices. It's going to support every single one of their stores. It's going to give them, for the very first time, an ability to step through and do buy online, pick up in store, inventory analysis, things like that. But what they've been doing with Lifecycle Services is they started, and we talk about bringing value and letting you have a rapid time to value with Lifecycle Services. They signed a contract back with us in June. In July, through Lifecycle Services, we spun up 3 environments for them to go take a look at, 3 demo VMs. They were blown away. They said within 30 days of signing a contract with you, we already got value out of it. Because they used that to start figuring out what are the customizations we need. Then they stepped into Lifecycle Services and have literally been going through every single service in Lifecycle Services. So really looking forward. There's a great case study on our website that you can go take a look at that talks about all of the work that they're doing, and we're looking to update that once they go live. But it's a great, great way to see what they're doing with Lifecycle Services and how they're literally leveraging every service in there to the advantage at every single stage that they're going through.
Cool.
So I'll let you go ahead and take over for the...
All right, thank you. So Thanks, Winston. So one of the things you'll notice is, since we've been in market for a while, we're starting to see a lot of these customer scenarios, and you'll start seeing some of these case studies. To the point about change management, use these case studies as kind of reinforcing it back to your teams to kind of make that plunge and start leveraging LCS more fully in your implementation. So from an investment perspective, obviously, from a monthly cadence perspective, we keep revving. Right? And there's one thing that I want to call out. We call it within the team as usage hacking. And it's something that's spreading around Microsoft as well in terms of the term. Essentially what that means is we look at usage. We actually have a set of meetings where we just look at usage and how people are using LCS. And there's a certain percentage of our development time every month that we just say, okay, how do we make this user happier? How do we make this user more complete? Right? If a user who has only logged into LCS 4 times in their lifetime tells me or asks us for a new feature, I would rather listen to the partner or the customer who's been leveraging it more fully and kind of ask for that completion feature. So it's something that we call usage hacking, which is how do we get our existing users to use it more and see more value versus just kind of peanut buttering the whole thing. So it's something that we continuously do every month. But in addition to that, obviously, the Azure deployment story with R3 and what we have coming next is something that is very high priority for us. And one of the things that you'll hear from us in the next few months, months, is around the CRM on Azure story that we will be lighting up through LCS. So everything that I showed you, like business process modeler, diagnostics, issue search, cloud-powered support, it's not just an AX problem. Or it's not just valuable to AX. So that's something that we will be lighting up to for CRM folks as well in the coming weeks and months. With that said, that's all we had. So hopefully you'll kind of go to lcs.dynamics.com and get started. But if you have any questions, please do reach out to me, sthomas@microsoft.com. But we'd love to have you guys as users, as case studies, and all that good stuff in the next year, in the next conversions, whichever comes first. Cool. Thank you. And any questions will be here, or you guys can ask through the mics. Since we have a small crowd, we'll just take it here. That works better. Thank you.
Well, do you have a question?
Yeah.
This is really awesome. And
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, has SharePoint or Project Security
Yeah. So his question was, this is good stuff. Other Microsoft products, etc. How do we uptake a more integrated ALM story? So there's conversations happening today. One of the things is you'll notice that in terms of LCS and Azure integration, it's going to get stronger. Like what you saw today yesterday in the keynote, in terms of AX and LCS having a profile in the keynote, that's a big deal, right? So that's something that we're building on top of to get more products having ALM story like this. But you'll see us aligning a lot closer with the Azure ALM story, and it'll make both of us better. But I think it's a valid point. I think we get the feedback from customers. At Convergence, actually, a lot of analysts gave that feedback saying, wonderful, this exists for AX and Dynamics. What about this product? So it's something that we're looking at internally very, very closely. But it's a good problem to have.
and a good follow-up to that, too, is to the case of trying to build out, we're even looking at disaster recovery scenarios that we can do. Yep. I'm actually doing a demonstration tomorrow of Azure Site Recovery with AX. So we're building out into all those areas and finding out what we can do to help integrate into it, and we're getting a lot of interest from it.
The aspect about the case management, when you've been working with Microsoft, how you scale out, a server for you guys to use.
Yep.
It makes it a lot less complicated
Yep.
for everybody. The customer, whoever's hosting it, whoever's hosted that.
Yep.
Yep.
Makes it so much easier.
And especially if you have to go to an escalation piece, you're not starting all over from scratch going, okay, what's the version?
Yep.
It all travels with it.
So please use it and let us know your feedback after using it as well. Cool. Thank you.
Great.
So I was just wondering now, if you're sitting with a huge installation with lots of environment and lots of licenses on-prem, and you would like to go to Asia, can you kind of, can the licenses go to Asia? Can you get
Yes, actually, when you license R3 on Azure or on-prem, the licensing is exactly the same, and the licenses are portable. So if you start out and you want to deploy it on-prem and that's the way you want to do it and you get comfortable and you go, I want to move it to Azure, all those licenses move over.
Cool. And I think we're supposed to give a pitch about the evaluation thing.
The evaluation,
So
please make sure you fill out the evaluations.
cool. Any
other-
questions? Yep, go for it.
Tell us a little bit more about the data. So as we get new instances instantiated, demo, or deployment, is there some data that's also being populated, or it's blank system that we need to add data to?
So for the demo instance, it's essentially blank, right? But there's one piece that we're working on in a future state, codename box, essentially where it's going to be more than just a blank instance, right? It's going to be a base AX instance with a solution, and that solution also has a data aspect of it as well. But today what we have in market that you can start using today is without data. It's essentially just a plain vanilla AX base instance.
We're starting to use it, and do you see any issues with actually cloning existing? Let's say we use it for a demo, and then we'll use it down the road again. I don't know, based on what you have shown us here in our experience, we can continue using the same VM. It would be nice to be able to actually clone that, so we can have multiple instances, so we don't start from scratch.
Yeah, so you can deploy it, you can keep it as long as you want, and you can pause it or resume it just so you're not paying for fun. And
Really, just a checkpoint. The demo VM deploys and is only good for 365 days.
Oh, yeah,
it
the
times out
license
after
then.
365 for the demo. Dev tests keep going,
Yeah.
but the demo times out.
And then, there's Azure tools that allows you to replicate the VM, because that's kind of independent of anything to do with Dynamics or LCS. It's just, give me a VM, let's replicate it. So that scenario is possible. But the license piece, yeah. For the demo one, because everything is kind of using demo licenses, I think it kind of time bombs after 360, is it?
Yeah, 365. Because it deploys with SharePoint, it deploys with AX, it deploys with the full Office suite, everything in there fully licensed.
The engineers typically don't worry about the licensing stuff. Just kidding. Yep. Cool. Yep.
Has there been any expressions of concerns from your partners or from your customers about the fact that this is outside of their control?
So, good question. And I think this is where, obviously going back to the change management piece, there's a lot of concerns and everything. One of the things is, hey, what's my IT person going to do now? Right? Which is a good concern, because then you can kind of get into how do you add more value. The second piece is control. So one of the things we heard was customer owns the project. If they change partners, what happens to my data? Right? But if you really look at it, it's no different from what I call the binary world. Let's say you have a bunch of binders, you go into a customer site, they tell you not to show up tomorrow. What happens to that binder? Right? Now, obviously, we'll do better than that. So one of the things is, since we know whoever uploads the artifacts into the project, when you're taken out of the project, we give you the chance to pull out your artifacts as well. Right? But it's...
I'm looking at it more from that, also looking at it from like a compliance standpoint.
Yep.
There's some types of environments where you have to have everything within that container,
Mhm.
and especially in the federal sphere.
Yeah.
And perhaps there could be some use to having some sort of on-prem, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
version
Private,
that
yeah.
can get some code pushed back to
Yeah.
it. And, hey, we're going to let the Microsoft
Sure.
support person look at our.
Yeah. So today we don't have support for that. So essentially LCS is today all public cloud. But we are thinking through, like, for example, the public sector space, for example, is pretty hot on, even the cloud support VM that we provision. They're like, oh, I can't put my data in there because I'm public sector. So that public sector, private cloud specific scenarios we're kind of looking at. But in a lot of cases, it's customers and partners that don't have those requirements that tell us, oh, I want it. So those ones are not really valid. It's just, we need to change with where the things are going. But for public sector customers, I think it's a very valid scenario. And some of the other special ones. And that's something that we're looking at right now.
Well, and a quick follow-up too, the ones that are doing public sector with the cloud-powered support, they realize they have to take that step to cleanse some of the data before they upload it. So they accept the fact that they have to do that, but it's a smaller step that they need to do to be able to then get it and repro it and be able to move it forward. So they usually create a standard demo set, and they'll just use that for when they need to do it.
Well, I can see how we can, anybody could potentially show up and throw a demo environment and say, hey, customer, with your
Yep.
that nobody can touch, but it might be nice also to still be able to use the deployment tools.
Yep.
Be able to bring some of that stuff across that boundary, right?
Yep.
Right. Well, and then when you combine that, though, with the sovereign clouds that are coming out, like the G Cloud in the U.S. and other ones that are being built, and the fact that you've got that, the project control of managing who's got access to that data, you kind of actually take a step away from that question of saying, well, who has control? You know exactly who has access to it because you only allow them into the project. And the only way to get access to that VM is to go through the project.
So yeah, I think so. This is something that we're working on. If anybody has like typical like scenarios like this, working with customers, we'd love to kind of hear from you and kind of that we get early design verification for what we're thinking. So we'll take one last question and then.
So the production deployments that you're seeing that are now going to Azure, are you deploying those through LCS?
Yes.
Yes.
And then, so I guess then the next step, as the next CU comes out, are you applying those through an automated process to update those future VMs, or is that still then manual?
Yeah. So automated application of updates, we're still very far away. But there's an update service within LCS. So where, let's say there's a CU available or updates available, we highlight the VM and say, this VM is not on the latest CU. These are the deltas. These are the updates that Microsoft shipped. And then there's a very good experience around how you can apply it. It's still manual, where you'll need to analyze the impact, accept what you want to do, et cetera, and then apply it.
But you've also done as best practices are changing or may get it applied and publishing those in any manner so that somebody who has deployed into production then can find out. So if I deploy an environment now, but 6 months from now you guys have added 5 other best practices and other things, how do I know what's changed to then apply that?
So for the diagnostics best practices, you can choose how often you run it. So if you run it daily and we ship an update tomorrow, you'll get it in the time you run it next. So that scenario is actually the advantage of kind of going cloud first on LCS. So cool. All right. Thank you very much. We're still here if you have questions, but otherwise, thank you for showing up.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.